Tsukasa is a genius loser who smooth-talked an entire country into making him president. However, his entire life changes when he gets Isekai'd to another world and has to lead a team of prodigies to clap anyone who's dumb enough to stand in their way. It all starts in Japan, where 7 extraordinary students are renowned as prodigies. There's Ringo, the world's top inventor. If Elon Musk had her skills, he'd be on the moon already. Aoi, the world's top swordsman, who is faster than a speeding bullet as long as she swings her sword. Next is Kina, the world's top doctor who might cure mortality at this rate. Then there's Masato, the world's top entrepreneur. He's basically the secret love child between Steve Jobs and Jeff Bezos. Next, there's Akatsuki, the world's top magician, but even he can't make your crippling anxiety disappear. Meanwhile, Shinobu is the world's greatest detective, but unlike Batman, she won't leave any jokers alive. Lastly, there's Tsukasa, the world's greatest politician. Even Trump would vote him president. One day, these 7 prodigies were on a flight together when something suddenly went wrong. Later, Tsukasa wakes up and finds an elf named Lirul in front of him. He wonders what's going on and remembers the last thing being the emergency sign on the airplane. When Tsukasa realizes the plane went down, he asks Lirul what happened to the others. She calmly tells him they were all rescued safely and brought to their village. Relieved, he explains that it's a public officer's duty to care about his citizens. He then thanks her for the assistance, but Lirul says that mountain folk are used to helping people in need. Before long, she serves him up some stew and offers to feed him. Tsukasa apologizes and says he doesn't have the energy to eat, but Lirul insists that he needs to eat to regain his strength. With no other choice, Lirul chews a chunk of the stew herself and transfers it to Lirul through tongue wrestling. Lirul suddenly gets embarrassed, but Tsukasa thanks her for the fan service and asks for some of her special sauce. Lirul quickly gobbles up another spoon worth, but before they can lock lips, someone walks in to see if the kids are awake. Tsukasa noticed the tail and ears and wondered if there were anime conventions up in the mountains. The woman introduces herself as Winona, so Tsukasa thanks her for the hospitality and promises to repay her accordingly when he returns to his country. Winona is surprised to hear how mature he is since she has a son his age, but Tsukasa says she looks too young for that to be possible. Winona gets flattered, and when Tsukasa notices her tail wagging, he asks if it's real. At this, Winona lets him feel her warmth and wonders how he's never seen a Buma before. Lirul adds that all 7 of them were dressed weirdly, so they're probably from a far country. When Tsukasa says they're from Japan, neither of the girls recognize the name. Tsukasa insists they're both speaking Japanese, but they inform him that they're actually speaking Altan. At this, Tsukasa examines them closely and determines that they couldn't possibly be lying, making him fear the worst might have happened. He then asks to be taken to the crash site where they found them. Moments later, they arrive at the site and Tsukasa is surprised to see what's left of their plane. There's no way they would have been able to survive the crash. Suddenly, he notices a large figure and finally discovers where Drogon flew off with Daenerys. At this, Tsukasa finally accepts that they've been summoned to another world. A month later, the village throws a feast to celebrate the kids' recovery. Now they've all gotten used to life in another world, except for Akatsuki, who's convinced it must be a sick joke. The village kids take advantage of Akatsuki's nightmare fuel, but Lirul chases them off. She then explains that in their world, Bumas are humans with animal-like features and extra strength, while Huma are ordinary humans who sometimes have the rare ability to use magic. Tsukasa suggests that someone probably used magic to summon them there, so he tells Shinobu to investigate it immediately. After, Winona presents steamed potatoes to the village kids, but they're already sick of eating them. However, this time, Tsukasa added a sticky cream he created for them to try. The kids can't believe how tasty the cream is, so Tsukasa offers one to Lirul too. Once everyone is blown away, Tsukasa reveals that it's none other than mayonnaise. The feast continues and Winona says she remembers an old story of 7 heroes who came from another world. This catches the kids' attention, so she explains that according to the story, the 7 heroes saved the land from an evil dragon. At this, Winona's son, Ulch insults her for believing in fairy tales and wasting the village's money on these 7 strangers. He then turns to the prodigies and tells them to leave their village since they are done healing from their wounds. As he runs off, Winona apologizes for birthing a dumbass. Later, Tsukasa holds a meeting with the others to discuss the otherworld situation. First, they need to gather information about this new country and magic. Next, they need to find a way back to their own world, starting from the story of the former 7 heroes. Lastly, they need to rebuild the village's finances. The others agreed since they need to pay the village for their generosity. By the next day, Ringo informs Tsukasa that she's modified their cell phones to work in the new world. She also returned to the crash site and was able to retrieve the mini nuclear reactor she created. Her next plan is to convert the ore near the crash site into aluminum, which would take her 3 days. Suddenly, they overhear some commotion in the village and go to check out what's happening. There, Winona stands up to corrupt Imperial Knights, who seem to be looking for places to stick their tools in. Tsukasa steps in and tells them to leave, so the Chief Knight gets mad and orders his men to attack. Unfortunately, the men drop like limp noodles thanks to Aoi and Shinobu. When the knight tries to attack Tsukasa, Tsukasa shows him not to be fooled by the suit. Tsukasa threatens the men to carry their parasitic asses back to where they came from, so they run off, but Masetha worries that they might find a way to retaliate. However, Tsukasa already prepared an insurance policy. At that moment, Akatsuki appeared before the knights, making them think he was some sort of mage. Akatsuki threatens to take their heads off with a demonstration, so the chief begs hard for them to keep their lives. Akatsuki agrees and threatens him one last time, so he gets the message. Later, the prodigies meet and Tsukasa suggests they all play to their strengths. Since they're prodigies, however, he tells them to nerf their abilities so they don't accidentally break this world. The next day, Masato and Elch have a disagreement with the trading company and storm out. However, the Fatso warns them that they can't conduct business elsewhere without a trading permit. Outside, a little girl overhears as Masato tells Elch they shouldn't do business they won't benefit from. Elch knows they're being ripped off, but there's no other trading company in town. Masato then laments how condescending that roast pig was and asks Elch to let him take charge of their business trip. Elch agrees, and Masato promises to crush the trading company in a week. Back at the village, Lerul thanks Tsukasa for all their help, but he insists they're only doing the littlest they can to repay the village for their kindness. All the other prodigies were using their skills to assist the village while Tsukasa got to work on making more mayonnaise. Lerul is glad to have more recipes to work with, but their supplies were running dangerously low. However, Tsukasa assures her that Masato is already on it. At this, Lerul remembers Elch's outburst and hopes he's playing nice with them, so Winona shows up and explains that stubbornness runs in the genes. She explains that Elch is the village treasurer, but ever since the fat pig Jakoi monopolized their trade, they've been struggling to keep everyone fed. Despite this, Tsukasa calmly assures the ladies that Masato is like capitalism in human clothing and is probably establishing his own company at this moment. Sure enough, Masato presented Elch with a business permit for a new trading company. When he asks how he managed to get one, Shinobu pops out of nowhere and says it was all thanks to her. Masato explained that the mayor had been doing some shady deals behind the scenes, so Masato basically blackmailed him into handing him a permit. Since Shinobu's work is done, she goes back to gather information while Masato suggests they stock up for their new trading company. When Elch wonders why they would need to stock up, Masato tells him he's about to get a free lesson on how to make a shit ton of money. Suddenly, a little girl pops out, saying she wants to make money too. She explains that she's sick of living under people and begs Masato to teach her the ropes. Masato agrees to add her to the group. And when Elch tries to object, Masato explains that her greed would be good for business. The girl introduces herself as Rue, so Masato promises to make her crazy money without pretending to be an internet prince. At that, the three of them officially became the Elm Trading Company. That night, Rue gets a makeover while Masato begins to pitch the trading company to traders from another village. The men feel skeptical, but Masato slides his business permit out to assure them they're legit. Masato requests 10% of their sales in return for hosting their sales, in addition to manning the shop. The men don't even know what 10% means, so Masato jumps in to explain. If they sold to Fat Man Jakoi, they could only get as little as 150 luck on their sale, but if they did business with the Elm Trading Company, they'd get to keep as much as 360 luck. Upon hearing this, the men ask to join in and tell the other villages too. They all agree on a plan and conclude the business meeting. After the traders leave, Elch asks if they'll really be able to stock up without paying a single cent, but Masato tells him to wait and see. The next day, Elch and Rue are shocked to see their trading company full of stock for sale. At this, Masato explains that the one thing that's more important than money in business is trust, and nothing holds more trust in their town than the business permit. Masato asks Elch what makes this method a nasty one, so Elch suggests it's because they get to make profit at no risk. Masato says he missed something and asks Rue if she knows what it is. Rue then reminds him that the traders also have to man their shops for free. With all that free labor, they could become bigger than even Jacoi's trading company. That afternoon, customers start noticing the market, so Masato announces that they've got quality options for a lower price than Jacoi's daylight robbery. Before long, the shop is full of customers, so Masato tells the guys to put their backs into it and sell. That evening, Shinobu updates Masato on Jacoi's plans, but Masato already saw them coming. The next day, Winona is surprised to get tons of supplies to the village, and everyone else is just as surprised. Meanwhile, Shinobu updates Tsukasa on how things are going and says they'll be back in 3 or 4 more days since he still intends to crush Jacoi's company as promised. Meanwhile, Jacoi wonders why the mayor would hand those little runts a business permit, but he's otherwise unfazed, thinking they'll soon go bankrupt. On the next market day, Rue helps to market their special cream by demonstrating how good it is on a pickle. The mayonnaise sells out instantly, to Masato's delight, but he tells his partners not to slack off, especially Rue, who might need maternity leave. Just then, another customer appears, and it turns out to be the captain of a merchant fleet. At this, Masato tells him he's been waiting especially for him. Later, the two men sit to discuss how they may be of help to each other. They eventually come to an agreement, and when Jacoi hears of this, he realizes he can no longer sit on his fat ass. He intends to start a market war. Meanwhile, Rue gets drunk at the sight of that many gold coins when Shinobu drops in. Masato figures that Shinobu must be there to inform him that Jacoi is on the move, so Shinobu tells him of the war. When Elch wonders what that means, Masato explains that Jacoi intends to forsake his profit to buy at any cost. He commends the Lardis for the strategy, but explains that it's already too late. Just then, he shows Elch an angry group of people outside, and says they're the ones who will tank Jacoi's business for him. Later, Ringo shows Tsukasa the progress she has made with manufacturing aluminum tools. Tsukasa says the village folk would be more than happy about it and commends her, making Ringo turn red like a bruised knee. Suddenly, Ringo starts yawning and gets embarrassed, so Tsukasa advises her to get some rest. After Tsukasa realizes everyone's getting exhausted from living a lifestyle they're not used to. At that moment, it begins to snow, and when he notices the village kids getting excited, he thinks of an idea. Meanwhile, Jacoi instructs his men to buy up all the merchant town, thinking they can win the war with just capital. However, his plans turn to dust when one of his men announces that they can't make a single sale. Jacoi goes on to investigate and finds the angry merchants rallying behind Masato. He reminds Jacoi of how he laid them off just to cut labor costs, and since Jacoi let them go to waste, Masato happily took them in. Thanks to this, all the merchants signed a 3-year trading contract with Elm Trading Company, so all their goods belong to them. Jacoi proceeds to shit his pants, and in a last-ditch effort, he tells the people that Masato is only deceiving them, and he's willing to pay them more for their goods. However, the merchants explain that they sold their goods to Masato regardless. For them, they'd rather risk their lives hauling goods for someone trustworthy than a greedy fat piece of talking chicken thighs. Jacoi falls on his knees and begs them to reconsider, promising that he'll never lower prices unfairly again. Unfortunately, the merchants insist that they don't trust him anymore. Masato mocks Jacoi for throwing away the trust he had built for extra money and says he went too far. Elch marvels as Masato finally makes good on his promise to crush Fatso over there. However, Masato suddenly does a 180 and says it wouldn't be good for any business to have a monopoly, so he suggests they all talk it out. Of course, he intends to rip Jacoi off to a reasonable degree. Later, while Masato entertains Rue, Elch asks why he didn't stump on Jacoi like the over-cockroach he is. Masato explains that there was no way to keep that many merchants employed and always planned to throw them back to Jacoi. Elch wonders how he can say that after all that talk of trust and wonders if he's actually a bad person. Masato proudly identifies as a demon lord. Just then some men run up to accuse Masato of running off with someone else's goods. Masato realizes they're talking about Rue as they drag her away. When Masato sees this, he asks Rue if she wants him to save her. Rue immediately remembers how she was separated from her family to become slave. Rue then walks to Masato and promises to become a successful merchant one day and buy back her father and mother. She also promises to pay him back and begs him to buy her on the spot. Before the thug can complain, Masato throws a bag of money in his face for payment. The men quickly grab the gold and run off while Masato tells Rue that she's far more valuable than the money he just spent.
What do you mean by that?
Rue cries into his arms while Elch says he never knew it felt this good to spend money on something. Later, Shinobu updates Tsukasa on Masato's victory with the trading company. She then reveals the result of her investigations. In this world, there are fire, water, wind, and earth spirits whose powers can be borrowed. However, people who can use real magic are scarce, and there's only one mage in their town. Unfortunately, Tsukasa realizes there isn't much information on summoning magic, but he takes what he can get and thanks Shinobu for a job well done. As for the 7 heroes, there's zero information on them except for a religion called the Seven Light Faith. However, the religion was destroyed by the current empire along with any other religion that didn't allow the empire to be placed above their god. Even though the surrounding towns had no single record of any religion, Tsukasa concluded that it was still their best clue on how to return to their world. Shinobu informed Tsukasa that they would need a travel permit from the Marcus to continue the investigation, but the Marcus was a great glory hole. Tsukasa got interrupted when Aoi told him they had finished his project, so Tsukasa says he finally got some public facilities running. Later, Winona and Kine were soaking off in the bathhouse with their leaf bathing suits. Ringo was embarrassed to be in front of Tsukasa with her pancake chest, while Lirul's milk jugs weren't making her situation any better. Tsukasa realized he was bruised from all the work he was doing, so Lirul helped rub her slimy salve all over his hands to help him heal faster. Suddenly, Akatsuki charges in and informs them that the villagers are being attacked by a monster. The group immediately takes off to help them while Lirul and Akatsuki stand by as Masato and the others arrive. Meanwhile, the villagers looked done for till Aoi stepped in to face the monsters. Tsukasa asked if anyone was injured, so the villager informed him that the mayor was no longer breathing. Since it hadn't been long, Tsukasa told Kinet to work her magic. Kinet takes a look and determines that multiple bones are broken, and some of his organs are hanging out like Christmas decorations. However, this was child's play to Kinet, who was about to begin the operation. Meanwhile, Aoi kept the monster busy, looking for an opening to end it once and for all. She finally leaped forward. At the same time, Kinet began fixing up the mayor, and after massaging his heart, she was able to revive him in no time. After stitching him up, she reported that he'd wake up in about 3 days. Everyone was relieved, and Aoi also made it back unharmed. Meanwhile, Masato and the others were suddenly approached by the Knights of the Marcus, led by Inzeji. Inzeji instructed them to seize the villagers, but kept a special eye on Lirul's jiggle physics. After capturing the entire village, the knights accused them of gathering gold coins illegally. Masato informed them of his business permit, but Inzeji insisted that it was treason for such lowly beasts to touch gold at all. He claims that they live or die at the whim of the Marcus, and his order is to burn anyone who doesn't know their place. Moments later, Tsukasa and the others find the storehouse burning and plan to rescue everyone inside. However, Tsukasa stops them from doing anything reckless and informs them they have a master escapist inside. At that, Akatsuki appears along with the rest of the villagers. Masato informs Tsukasa that the attack was ordered right from the Marcus, but before Tsukasa could go further, he realized Lirul was missing. When the villagers realize Lirul has been kidnapped, Ulch suggests they storm the Marcus castle and rescue her. However, Tsukasa warns them that they'd basically be declaring war on a country, which would cause the Marcus to slaughter them all. Instead, Tsukasa offers to negotiate with the Marcus to keep Lirul in exchange for dropping the charge of treason. Elch gets mad that he would suggest something so messed up, but Tsukasa insists that it's the only way to settle things peacefully. At this, Winona interrupts and says that they'll no longer be themselves if they have to sacrifice Lirul. For them, their survival doesn't come first, because helping and supporting each other is what keeps them human. Winona grabs his hand and reveals that he'd injured himself out of anger. Tsukasa admits that he isn't devoid of emotions, so Winona asks him to help them rescue Lirul. Tsukasa warns them that once the fighting begins, mounds of corpses would pile up, and they would suffer in ways they couldn't imagine. So he asks if it's really worth their dignity as humans. When no one flinches, Tsukasa finally agrees to help them form a revolution with the other prodigies on board. Lastly, Tsukasa informs them that since they'll be putting their lives on the line, they'll have to advance their technology by 500 years. They'll basically be destroying the world as they know it. Meanwhile, Lirul is presented before the Marquis as a tribute from Inzaghi. The talking sack of potatoes can barely contain his excitement as he tells Lirul to come closer. When the thirsty old man places his grimy hands on Lirul, she remembers the deal she made with Inzaghi to keep the villagers safe as long as she let the sweaty man hit. Even though the man looked like he descended from frogs, she let him squeeze her stress balls and encouraged him to do as much as he wanted with her. Lirul was about to experience a fate worse than death when an electric spark suddenly sent the land whale flying. Inzaghi can't believe that Lirul of all people would be a mage, but the Marquis insists that he tie her up to await punishment. Meanwhile, the Elm Village was on the move while Ringo was setting up their firepower. After completing the programming, she hit the enter key and set a cannon blasting through the walls of the castle. Masatho led the villagers on foot to storm the castle, just as Inzaghi ran outside, surprised to see them alive. He ordered the crossbow squad to intercept them, but their flimsy arrows were easily deflected with their shields. Inzaghi wondered how they could possibly have such light and effective shields, so Masatho bragged that Ringo has developed a super rare alloy with unparalleled strength despite its mass. Its name was Vibranium, Duralumin. His men started to fall as his sniper took them out. After catching one of the arrows, he couldn't believe they had iron arrows that could fly from such a distance. Elch, on the other hand, was falling in love with the feeling of penetrating his victims with his tool. Inzaghi instructed his men to overwhelm them with their numbers, but Aoi showed up to show them quality trumps quantity. As she laid waste to the knights, Winona also joined in to show the power of an elm hunter. Inside, Shinobu and Sukesu raced to find Lirul as Shinobu led the way to the Marquis room. Suddenly, she stopped Tsukasa from getting sliced up as they came face to face with the Imperial Mage, who promised to Avada Kedavra their asses. Outside the castle, the Elm forces continue to hold off the knights, but when they start getting overwhelmed by their number, Akatsuki shows up to even the odds. The knights cower at the sight of a mage, but Akatsuki also wavers at the sight of the dead bodies. However, he steals his resolve and throws colorful smoke bombs at them. When the men ask what's going on, Akatsuki hints that they're poisoned, so the men drop their weapons and run for their lives. Inzaghi wonders what their own damn mage is doing when he realizes something must be wrong. Inside, Shinobu manages to dodge all of the mage's attacks, explaining that he's pretty easy to read. She slowly moves closer till she gets behind him and tases the Voldemort wannabe. Inzaghi finally catches up, so Shinobu offers to hold them off while Sukesu runs upstairs to find Lirul. When he reaches the Marquis room, he finds Lirul strung up like freshly washed underwear, but as he moves closer, he suddenly gets shot. Bubbleguts rejoices that he managed to get a hit and assumes all the forces outside must have been destroyed too. He blames Lirul for causing all this commotion and promises to teach her a lesson. He then uses his slimy knife to cut through her dress and prepares to start feasting. However, Tsukasa calmly tells him to get his sausage roll away from Lirul. Thanks to his protective suit, Tsukasa is completely fine, so he pulls out a gun and shoots the knife from the Marquis' hands. Tsukasa informs him that he's got 6 more shots left, so Marquis begs him to take Lirul and leave, even offering to give him cash too. Tsukasa explains that the Empire wouldn't possibly let them off after displaying so much violence, so there's no turning back for them. They intend to rebuild the nation so all men are equal and establish a democratic government so everyone has a say in politics. The Marquis says their ideas were delusional and insists that the Emperor would never let them happen. Tsukasa boldly says they'll simply claim the Emperor's head before he claims theirs. The Marquis asks if they really think they can bring about change, but Tsukasa assures him that's why politicians exist. He shoots the Marquis square in the head, though it's just a rubber bullet. Then, he unties Lirul and checks if she's okay. Suddenly, a strange voice comes from her body and tells Tsukasa that he doesn't have much time. The voice tells him that the world is being consumed by an evil dragon's mouth, and tells the heroes to stop it from happening. Tsukasa tries to ask more questions, but Lirul returns to her usual self and asks what the hell is going on. Tsukasa informs her that the villagers stormed the castle just to rescue her. Outside, the troops rejoice over a landslide defeat, while Kinet attends to any injuries. The people rejoice when Tsukasa and Lirul emerge. Then Tsukasa decides that the next stage in their mission is to create a god. Days later, the citizens of Dortmund City were stunned when they saw a moving metal object before them. Out of it came Aoi and Kinet, who helped to present Akatsuki, their new god. Akatsuki began putting on his regular show, making a whole building disappear. Once the people were eating it up, they displayed free mayonnaise up for grabs. Rue went to work with her throat game, and before long, everyone had grabbed their share of mayonnaise in return for believing in their god. Behind the scenes, Isekai'd explained that religion was the fastest way to unite the region instead of simply declaring themselves a new nation. They ripped off the Seven Lights faith name, hoping that they'd eventually be contacted by someone who knew the real one. Meanwhile, Shinobu and Elch set out on a journey to gather information from other cities. In the meantime, the Seven Light Faith was garnering intense popularity thanks to the power of mayonnaise. That night, the mayor of Dormant decided he needed to evacuate when he got a surprise visitor. It turned out to be Tsukasa in a maid's outfit. The mayor recognized him as one of Akatsuki's angels and asked what he wanted. Tsukasa explained that they weren't trying to cause chaos, but would actually like to work with him and the nobility. The mayor realized it was a better deal than living out his days in fear, so he asked what he would need to do. At this, Tsukasa said he needed to show allegiance to the Seven Light Faith. The next day, the mayor went before the people and officially announced that the city would be governed by the growing Circus Act. Everyone was glad to hear the news except for a certain knight named Bernard. Later, the prodigies gathered to laugh at how cute Tsukasa looked in his maid outfit. Ringo almost exploded from excitement, so Masato promised to send her a copy to use at night. Afterward, Tsukasa tells the others that they can head back to Elm Village to get some rest while he stays in Dortmund for a while. Key mentions that they're running low on medical supplies and asks for a facility to produce antibiotics, so Tsukasa promises to send labor and resources, and asks for a list of everything she needs. He then tasks Aoi with staying by Akatsuki's side wherever he goes, even to the bathroom. Then he tells Ringo they're in need of a new power station, so Ringo offers to build a thermal one. He tasks Masato with securing the materials she'll need, so Masato tells him to leave it to him. As for the remaining soldiers, Tsukasa plans to unite them into the Seven Light Faith Knights, and he knows just the man he wants for the job. Meanwhile, the city knights discuss their new assignment under the Seven Light Faith, while their captain suddenly tells them he is quitting. Later, Tsukasa finds the captain at a pub and asks to join him. Tsukasa tells him that after doing his research, he's seen he's reliable and good at making sound judgments. Bernard is flattered, but he asks what Tsukasa really wants. When Tsukasa brings up the Order of Knights, Bernard informs him that he's called it quits because of their Seven Light Faith. He explains that despite the mayonnaise feasts, the Empire would surely come to attack them, and there was also something important that he needed to do. When Tsukasa returned, Masato asked how the meeting went. Tsukasa said Bernard was exactly the man he thought he was and planned to talk to him again. The next day, Tsukasa tracked Bernard down at his home and told him they wanted him as the leader of the Order of Knights. Bernard reminds him of his resignation, but Tsukasa insists that it's all the more reason. At that moment, his daughter comes running up, and Bernard pauses to focus on her. Bernard explains that his daughter is the treasure his wife left him when she died. After letting her run off, he says he became a knight so he could spend more time with her. But if being a knight means he'll be sent off in a war and unable to stay with his precious daughter, Bernard says he has no interest. He then concludes that someone as pathetic as him isn't fit to be a leader either. Tsukasa assures Bernard that they didn't need him to give up his daughter because they are simply trying to build a democratic nation so everyone can be free. Bernard listens closely as Tsukasa points out the unfair forces that currently determine whose life has value. When Bernard looks at his daughter, he realizes that it's a knight's duty to protect the things they hold precious. Tsukasa asks him one more time to be the leader of the knights, so Bernard bends the knee and accepts his new appointment. That evening, some drunk nobles lament how much they hate Tsukasa as he walks by. He expected opposition from the nobles and plans to keep an eye on them going forward. In another city, Shinobu disguises herself as an airhead bar waitress to gather intel from the knights. The idiot knight runs his mouth at the sight of her unplowed lands, giving away information about their armies and their leader. According to him, their duke was once a knight who stood the front lines by himself, earning him the title of duke. Later, Shinobu rejoins Elch, whose flat chest wasn't able to get him any intel. Shinobu tells him about Gustava, who's apparently a powerful mage, and suggests they go meet him themselves. Meanwhile, Inzeji appears before Gustave to ask for help, but Gustave slices off his head, calling him a coward for still being alive. He then promises to burn all the rebels to the ground for his emperor. Back in Dortmund, Tsukasa met with the leaders and told them they'd be implementing a new code of laws. Though everyone looks tense, no one dares to object. Later, the mayor is about to leave Tsukasa's office when he points out his lack of rest or sleep. However, Tsukasa assures him that he'll get some rest after the work is done. Back in the village, Winona thanks Kine for fixing her dad up. Winona tells him that so much has happened since he's been asleep, so he hopes to get better to fight in the next battle. Kine threatens to put him back to sleep if he overexerts himself, so he promises to take it easy. Suddenly, Rue stumbles in mumbling something about multiplication. After they nurse her back to life, she explains that she's been spending all her time learning the multiplication tables. Winona and her dad suck at it too, but they tell her she can make a good living without knowing how to multiply. Rue ignores the muscles for brains do, and Kine encourages her to study hard, so she masters the basics. Meanwhile, Ringo and Masato show Tsukasa the progress on the new power plant, which takes care of their power generation issue. When Tsukasa thanks Ringo, she blushes and promises to get on the next project. Tsukasa tells Masato of his plan to modernize their military, so Masato asks why he doesn't just build an automatic machine plant. Tsukasa says that since it's technically the people's fight, he wants them to learn how to fight for themselves. In the meantime, Ringo needs to work on an aerial defense system, since their world has magic and dragons which count as aerial warfare. He remembers the report Shinobu gave him of Gustav's ability to obliterate an entire city with his flames. Masato figures Gustav plans on using it on them, and Tsukasa agrees. Just then, Lirul walks up to Tsukasa and says that she wants to be useful to them in some way, so she's distributing food. She then asks Tsukasa if they could have lunch together so she can thank him properly for saving her. However, Tsukasa turns her down and says he has a meeting to attend. After he leaves, Lirul asks Masato if Tsukasa hates her, explaining that he's been avoiding her since the war started. Masato tries to reassure her, but Lirul starts to think that maybe he's got a thing against pointy ears. At this, Masato reveals that Tsukasa actually feels guilty. He was the only one who suggested abandoning her when the village suggested they rescue her. However, Masato explains that he only suggested it out of concern for the village as a whole. Lirul comes to understand that Tsukasa is the type to sacrifice those precious to him for the good of the majority. Masato thinks he's kind of crazy and advises her to leave him be. That night, Tsukasa meets with one of the workers and gives him a day off for working hard. When the man leaves, Tsukasa realizes he might be pushing himself too far. Suddenly, he hears a knock from Lirul and tries to dismiss her so he can rest, but Lirul doesn't take no for an answer and barges in instead. When she insists on doing anything he wants to repay her, Tsukasa confesses that he tried to abandon her. Lirul says she made the same decision to protect the village, but he still came to save her. Tsukasa sadly tells her he's not the man she thinks he is, but Lirul reminds him of all the mayonnaise he gave out and how he risked his life for the village. Suddenly, Tsukasa responded by saying he took his own father's life. When he was young, Tsukasa looked up to his politician father, but one day he discovered his power was built on corruption. Because of this, he worked with Shinobu and Masato to expose his father's dirty secrets, causing him to be taken to trial and sentenced to death. His mom tried to slap out whatever demon might have possessed him, but it was too late. Even now, his mom hates him for taking away the man she loved, criminal or not. However, Tsukasa insists that he still can't forgive his dad for what he did. Suddenly, Lirul bursts into tears and asks how it doesn't hurt. Tsukasa says that it does, but the type of politician he's striving to be has to be a selfless saint. Lirul runs to Tsukasa's side and tells him he's being selfish by distancing himself from her. She promises him that no matter what, she will never hate him. Tsukasa finally relents and tells her he has a difficult task for her. Moments later, he rests his head on her thighs and tells her he can get 3 hours of rest in 1 hour with her. Lirul is happy to stay there all night, but Tsukasa warns her to wake him if her legs go numb. As Tsukasa drifts off to sleep, he thanks Lirul for crying for him. However, Ringo spies on them getting cozy and storms back to her workstation. The next day, Rue continues to struggle with her multiplication tables. Akatsuki prepares to go in, so he tells the girls not to peek at his baby carrot. When he takes too long, Aoi slaps his cheeks into the water and reminds him that she hates procrastinators. When they notice Rue, they hope they didn't scare her, but she says she was just surprised. Akatsuki laments having to share a bath, but Aoi insists he needs to be guarded at all times, since he's the leader of the Seven Light Faith. When he asks what Kine is doing there, she tells him 2 melon pears are better than 1. Defeated, Akatsuki asks Rue what's eating her goat, so she explains that she needs to memorize her multiplication tables to become a merchant. Aoi remembers her own training days when she had to repeat the same sword forms over and over. Akatsuki also remembers getting bored of his magic tricks, while Keen Elements having to memorize tons of anatomy books. When Ru asked how they pushed through it, Aoi says she found a goal for herself. They all told her their motivation to become the best in Kine, adds that after having a goal, all that's left is to work hard. Ru remembers her parents and realizes she already has a goal, so she decides to work hard to see it through. Akatsuki asks her for something she likes, and when Ru says money, he tells her to imagine money anytime she wants to do math. Using this, he asks how much 5 stacks of 5 gold coins are, and she quickly says 25. He tests her with harder numbers, and she breezes through them, even able to calculate 24 times 365. Ru becomes ecstatic that she finally conquered her multiplication demons, but days later she goes back to square one when she's faced with learning division and can't bear to imagine her coins disappearing. Meanwhile, Shinobu and Elch visit a village where the people are happy to stuff them with drinks and food to welcome them. The villagers explain that their happiness is all thanks to Gustava, so they're happy to share. Even Elch is surprised to see that their village is prospering so much while Shinobu gets shit-faced on beer and wine. After eating, the innkeeper and her daughter show them to their room, and when they ask if Shinobu is okay, Elch assures them she's just fine. However, before they leave, the little girl tries to warn Elch to leave the village, but her mom quickly tells her to leave the room. Brushing it off, Elch says that if the villagers are that comfortable, they are unlikely to believe in the Seven Lights faith. Suddenly, Shinobu locked lips with Elch to sober him up. Elch asked why she was pretending to be drunk, so Shinobu explained that something wasn't right with the villagers. They were too eager to get them to eat and drink, but they never touched any of the food for themselves. When she looked closer, she realized that even though their makeup was hiding it, their eyes were jaundiced and their skin was pale and dried out, meaning they were all starving. Once Shinobu finished drawing her conclusions, she told Elch to follow her. They stuck down to the inn's basement, where they found remnants of dead travelers that had been stuffed with food. When they noticed the bloody cutting tools and leftover bones, they realized they'd been eating them too. Thankfully, Shinobu and Elch ate regular meat. Outside, a knight summoned the villagers from their homes for their routine inspection under their leader Jean. With smiles on their faces, all the villagers chorused the same greeting, giving praise to the imperial majesty. The knights went around to observe their posture, and once they were satisfied, they dismissed them to their homes. However, one of the knights noticed a speck of dirt on the child's sleeve. Jean reminded them that anyone living under his imperial majesty must be free of blemish. Elch and Shinobu watched in horror as the child was laid on the floor to be flogged. When her mom tried to volunteer as tribute, Jean reminded her that she had to keep a smile on her face or else. With no other choice, the mother smiled as they flogged her child before her eyes. Angered, Elch was on his way to save the little girl when Shinobu reminds him that the villagers tried to butcher and eat them. Elch remembers the little girl trying to warn them, so Shinobu says she has a plan. She steps out to confront the knights, and Genie instantly recognizes her tool as that of a ninja's. The knights arm themselves for battle, but Shinobu offers them a deal instead. She promises to take down more than half the knights, including Jean, or they could let the girl go and capture her without a fight. Jean agrees and orders them to release the child while they seize Shinobu. As Elch watches, he remembers Shinobu's plan to infiltrate the enemy's base while he reports to the others that she let herself get captured. Later, Shinobu has been strung up in her underwear. She plans to break out of the prison easily and force them to tell her all they know, but she's interrupted when Jean returns. Jean tells the other knight to wait outside so he doesn't watch a woman being brutally tortured. Shinobu warns Jean that she's taking her too lightly, but Jean looks like she's not one to play around. Back in the village, the innkeeper tends to her daughter and thanks Elch for saving her. When Elch reveals that he knows about their secret basement, the woman tries to beg for forgiveness, but Elch doesn't accept it. She explains that their village used to be a small farming village until Gustav became their lord and issued a beautification decree. The upgrade came out of the villagers' pockets, leaving them penniless. Since they couldn't get muddy, they couldn't work the fields. After there was nothing left to eat, they had no choice. The woman breaks down and laments how they were happy in their poverty before, but now there's no happiness left. Meanwhile, Shinobu is let go and asks what's going on. Jean explains that she's a member of a group called the Azure Brigade. She tells Shinobu that their common enemy is Gustava and asks for her help in protecting the people suffering under his rule. At the same moment, Gustava stands before a golden statue of the Imperial Majesty and plans to make more of them for the people to see. His servant explains that the gold required to make just one statue has driven his people to eat travelers and relatives for survival. The people would perish if they tried to make 3 more. Gustave insists that dying for His Majesty is the only way the peasants can prove their loyalty. When Gustave asks if they've wiped out the traitors under the Seven Light Faith, the man assures him that the 100,000 men plan to march on them after the winter. Gustave almost runs mad at the sound of their failure and starts to bang his sick head against the statue to appease His Majesty. He decides it's time to use his ultimate spell. At that, he enters a secret room to grab his flaming lance. Meanwhile, Leroy hears a voice in her head saying that danger is approaching the 7 heroes. The voice tells her to guide them, then disappears from her. At the same time, Gustave goes to the top of the castle and launches his lance. Back in Dortmund, Tsukasa gets an emergency notification about the lance. When he contacts Ringo, she's able to determine that its origin is from Gustave's castle. Tsukasa figures it's his ultimate attack and tells Ringo to fire the anti-air missiles. The first missile goes out, but it's unable to stop the lance. After calculating its new trajectory, Ringo says the lance has been directed to the nobles' houses, so Tsukasa tells her to hit it with more missiles to push it out of the city. According to the research he made, Gustave's magic was similar to an incendiary attack instead of an explosive bomb, so they should be fine if they don't take a direct hit. At this, Ringo sends out the missiles which start pushing it away, but when the last one tries to hit it, the lance dodges and impacts a part of the city. Out of the spear, an image of Gustave appears and tells the citizens that they'll be burnt to ash for defying His Majesty. Tsukasa watches as the fire begins to burn through the city and the men ask him what to do. Akatsuki appears to the people and tells them that despite the attack, the Seven Light Faith would not abandon a single one of them. Meanwhile, the leaders remember what to do from the emergency manuals, so Tsukasa reminds them to stay calm and carry out their given tasks. The men mobilize themselves and start preparing while Tsukasa gets a call from Ringo. Tsukasa tells her they're doing okay and asks another request from her. As the city burns, the nobles try to escape, wondering why they're also being targeted. When one almost gets crushed, Bernard swoops in to save them. The nobles ask why he'd help them after joining the rebel army, so he explains that the world they're trying to create doesn't care about nobility and the rest. Though the nobles think he's chatting shit, Bernard stays firm in his belief of the Seven Lights Faith. Meanwhile, the prodigies applaud Tsukasa for making the streets wider to prevent the fires from spreading. However, Gustave announces that their trick won't be enough to escape his wrath. At that, he releases several fire spirits that start going after the citizens. The citizens run for their lives as Gustave bloats in his power. The prodigies and the citizens evacuate to the central park, and Tsukasa says he has one more idea. Suddenly, Leroy runs up and informs them there's a way to break Gustave's spell. They need to destroy the lance that acts as the core of the spell. Tsukasa asks how she knows all this, and Lyrils breaks down and says she has no idea. However, she assures them that she's telling the truth and begs them to believe her. Tsukasa tells her he does since she came all the way to tell them despite being visibly scared and confused. Moments later, Ringo arrives with her mechanical bear and tells Tsukasa she has one missile left inside it. Tsukasa reveals that his last idea was to target the lance, but the bear points out that none of their attacks have been effective so far. Tsukasa explains that all the spirits were protecting the lance before, but they've now been scattered all over the city. However, the bear informs them that the lance would be hard to target because of all the fire around it. Masato suggests having the bear attack it directly, but the bear prefers not to become a burnt offering. When everyone draws a blank on what to do next, Aoi offers to run alongside the missile and manually guide it to its target. They don't think she's crazy, but she assures them she's not dumb enough to take on something she can't achieve. Tsukasa decides to trust her, so she gets soaked in water and tells Ringo she's ready to go. Once Ringo pushes the button, they both take off, with Aoi managing to match the missile's speed and guide it through. Even the prodigies are surprised at such a feat, but Tsukasa notices the plan won't go so smoothly. At that moment, Aoi spots a crowd of fire spirits waiting, so she directs the missile to the right where the coast is clear. However, Tsukasa notices it's a dead end and worries, but Aoi is able to force the missile upward. Kina wonders how she'll possibly reach the missile this way, but Aoi proves that she's actually Superman in a ponytail and kimono, because she manages to reroute the missile effortlessly. Gustave's spirit rises up to stop her, but she evades all its attacks because gravity is just a suggestion at this point. After using a tower to get closer to the ground, Gustava loses sight of her, and she gets in view of the lance. Rango locks on the missile, so Aoi jumps off and leaves the rest to it. Gustava's flames try to block the lance from getting hit, but Aoi uses her special sword technique to send a whirlwind that cuts off his arms and lets the missile hit. Gustava's spirit is expelled, and the prodigies celebrate their victory. Meanwhile, Gustava bleeds out from Aoi's cut as he laments being bested by insects and roars out in anger. Back in Dortmund, Lyrul hears the fire spirits thanking the prodigies for freeing them from the curse. Tsukasa also thanks Lyrul, since her courage was able to help save the citizens. Lyrul looks sad for the people they weren't able to save, but Tsukasa assures her that the war was always going to happen at some point. He points out that there's no future for a nation that is willing to slaughter its citizens mercilessly. The prodigies were working extra hard to make sure those sacrifices were not in vain, and they would create a future that saves thousands of lives. At this, Lyrul informs Tsukasa of the mysterious voice she heard in her head, and afterward, she was filled with magic and able to hear the spirits. Because of this new power, Lyrul offers to learn all she can about magic so she can fight alongside the prodigies. When she mentions that she might also figure out a way to send the prodigies home, Tsukasa thanks her for the help. The next day, Tsukasa updates Shinobu on Gustava's attack and says it would be troublesome if they had to face it multiple times. Shinobu assures him that wouldn't be the case because it takes a lot of time to bind spirits to such a powerful spell. That aside, Shinobu laments not being able to warn them beforehand, which means Gustave is truly impatient. Tsukasa also addresses her alliance with the Azure Brigade and tells her to keep feeding him any strategic information they know, since they're not sure if they're truly allies. Masato walks up to Tsukasa to catch up, so Tsukasa tells him about the voice inside Lyrul's head, telling her to guide them. Since he had seen it before, he wasn't surprised, but they're still not sure if the voice is an ally either. Masato asks what Tsukasa's next plan against the Empire is, and just then, their knights show up with their guns in hand, so Tsukasa says they'll be making the first strike. Back at Gustava's castle, Gustava ordered his servants to ready their troops to march on Dortmund. As for the neighboring lords, they're to send their troops out too if they don't want to get barbecued. Later, Jean discusses this development and suggests it's the perfect opportunity to strike. Meanwhile, the lords take their troops through the treacherous mountains, lamenting how impatient Gustave really is. They acknowledge how powerful Ahathet is, but he is certainly an awful leader. The lords wonder what kind of people the Seven Light Fates are, but they hope their troops were enough to take them. After spotting a castle nearby, they suggest getting some rest there when dormant soldiers suddenly come out of hiding and begin to shoot at them. The lords order a retreat, which Bernard was expecting, so he orders his men to pursue them back to their city. Meanwhile, the lord hears the dormant soldiers are in pursuit, so he plans to take advantage of their overconfidence and ambush them. Eventually, Bernard and his men come face to face with their heavy cavalry. The knights' metal armors make it impossible to penetrate with guns, making the lords think they've won. However, when the knights suddenly start collapsing, Bernard watches them with a knowing smile. Before this, Tsukasa had predicted the lords' ambush with the heavy cavalry and equipped him with grenades to deal with them. Now that their forces were gravely injured, the lords ordered a retreat. Meanwhile, Gustave was about to mobilize his army to lay waste to Dortmund when Jean planned to shoot him down. Gustave evaded the attack, but Jean called out for her men to strike the traitor down. At this, members of the Azure Brigade begin to rise up, fueling Gustave's rage. On the other hand, the lords hide away in their castles, thinking they're safe, till they see one of their castles taken out in an instant. Ringo's bear uses multiple drones to demand that the citizens lay down their arms in unconditional surrender. At this, the lords now accept that they're finished. Meanwhile, Gustava's soldiers fight against the brigade while Jean and Shinobu confront Gustave. Jean tells him to surrender for his wrongdoings against his people, but Gustave says that the people only exist to serve the imperial majesty. He then unleashes his flames, so Jean and Shinobu prepare to take him on. Firelord Ozai launches fireballs at the girls. Shinobu is able to dodge all of them, but Jean gets hit in the back, though her armor protects her. Shinobu plans to use a flash grenade on him, so they both charge in at the same time. Shinobu manages to blind him with the grenade, leaving him vulnerable for a second. Jean rushes in to end it, but he blocks her attack and sends her flying. Shinobu then keeps him busy long enough for Jean to plunge her sword into him. Before he can retaliate, Shinobu pushes her out of the way and drops a chandelier on top of him. Somehow Gustave isn't dead yet, so he uses his remaining blood to draw a magic circle. Shinobu figures it must be bad news and pulls Jean to escape. The whole building goes up in flames while the girls manage to escape safely. Back in Dortmund, the prodigies continue to provide support for the people while Shinobu reports to Tsukasa that they never found Gustava's body. Apparently, the Azure Brigade already declared him dead and claimed they were responsible. As for the other lords, they were about to swear allegiance to the Seven Light Faith. After all the chaos, the girls receive skin-to-skin massages using a special oil. Lirul feels shy, so the girls inform her that the oils were made by mages, and this could be a learning experience for her. Shinobu also notices Ringo looking away, and when she asks what's wrong, Ringo explains that she's not as beautiful or well-equipped as everyone else. Shinobu goes close to her and tells her she's cute the way she is. All the girls agree, and then Shinobu offers to show her the massages used to summon huge chesticles. When Ringo remembers the sight of Tsukasa under Liru's forbidden fruits, she tells Shinobu to go ahead. Shinobu then starts rubbing her grapes together, while Akatsuki wonders why his eyes need to suffer this assault. Later, the guys have some expensive tea together, when the girls walk in fresh from the spa. Masato makes sure to tease Akatsuki for his get-up, and even Tsukasa can't hide his laugh. Tsukasa tells him they can't afford to leave him alone, so he'll have to be at Aoi's side at all times. When Tsukasa asks about Lirul, they tell him she's gone to practice her magic. Apparently, her magic level is on par with the Emperor's elite mages. The prodigies are surprised, but Tsukasa reminds them that she's been on their side since they came to this world. Masato says they need to keep an eye out on the Azure Brigade, who are only trying to appease them so they don't get into conflict with them. Kine asks if Tsukasa thinks they'll be able to get along with the brigade, but Tsukasa says it'll be impossible. Tsukasa reveals that the leader of the brigade, Conrad, said that he had no idea where Gustava's gold statue was, even though his body language showed that he was lying. So Akatsuki asked why they offered to rebuild Gustava's region if Tsukasa knew about the lie. Tsukasa explains that Gustava might still be alive, so he wouldn't want to be anywhere near that statue. Plus, publicizing the Azure Brigade's corruption wouldn't do them any harm. The Seven Lights need to garner public opinion before making a move, which is where the rebuilding comes in. Tsukasa is about to give them their new orders when Kine stops him and says he and Ringo need to take 5 days of rest. If they kept working, they were both going to fall sick and need 10 days of recovery, so they better rest now. Tsukasa and Ringo agree, so Tsukasa asks Ringo to explore the city with him toward the end of their break. Later, Ringo's bear freaks out about her date with Tsukasa, but Ringo says she has no idea what to do on one. The bear reminded her not to let Lirul steal Tsukasa away from her, so Ringo knew what to do next. She went to Aoi for advice on how to get close to a man. Aoi brags about her several experiences with men and says she's even a good kisser, but all her advice turns out to be about fighting for survival. Ringo asks if she has some non-combat advice, so Aoi recommends she try sparring with the man and grabbing his jingle bells. After, she asks Kine for advice, and Kine actually gives her some sane advice until she pulls out the chloroform for stage 2. Her advice turns worrisome when she advises Ringo to take off his pants once he's out cold and have fun with anatomy. After that trauma, Ringo takes a bath to recover, and Shinobu pops up to ask what's wrong. Once she gets the gist of it, she assures Ringo she knows how to trap a man and keep them from escaping. With this, she promises to teach Ringo the secret ninja arts. The next day, Ringo waits for Tsukasa near the meeting spot thanks to Shinobu's first rule. Tsukasa arrives at the spot, but while Ringo is carried away, he spots her and ruins her plan to pretend to come late. When Tsukasa sees her red in the face, he asks if she's feeling sick, but Ringo assures him it's not the sickness he thinks. Before they set out, Tsukasa starts drawing too much attention, so he has an idea. They both rent out Buma costumes, and Ringo barely keeps it together when she sees how cute Tsukasa looks. Tsukasa tells her she looks cute too, making Ringo turn red. As they walk together, Ringo remembers Shinobu's words to not lose her nerve. Ringo plans to hold his hand by pretending to slip like Shinobu suggested. She readies herself and tries the move. Tsukasa catches her, but unfortunately, he announces that they are already at the restaurant. They head inside, and Ringo focuses on Shinobu's next part of the plan: the indirect kiss. The plan was to leave her cup right next to Tsukasa's and accidentally grab his cup to use. However, when Ringo reaches for Tsukasa's cup, he accidentally grabs hers and indirectly kisses her. Ringo passes out from the excitement. Now, Ringo was born as part of a genetics research experiment. Before she was out of diapers, she was solving complex equations, and by 6, she was the youngest to receive the Science Innovation Award, making her mother proud. However, as Ringo continued to receive praise for her outstanding intellect, her mother felt pushed to the background. One day when Ringo helped her mom finish a project, her mother lost it and called her a manufactured product. Ringo was devastated, but she thought working hard was the only way to please her mother. Unfortunately, her mother ended up rushing to the vegan milk store, wishing she never gave birth to a monster. When Ringo was in school, a boy asked if she could help fix a watch for him. It turned out to be Tsukasa, who insisted the watch was precious to him. Ringo worked hard to fix it for him and handed it over the next day. From then on, Tsukasa would give her different items to fix every day, making Ringo wonder what he was after. One day, one of the items needed a part she couldn't find anywhere online. She decided to create the part herself, and for the first time in years, she slept happily. The next day, she told Tsukasa she couldn't fix things for him anymore because she wanted to invent her own things, but Tsukasa seemed happy to hear it. On the way home, Ringo found him returning the spoiled items to a shop nearby and wondered if Ringo was collecting them just to help her. In the present, Ringo wakes up on Tsukasa's lap and panics. She feels like a failure for falling asleep on her mission, but when she remembers the dream she just had, she feels happy instead. As they watch the sunset together, she decides that it's enough to have Tsukasa this close to her. She then asks for a picture together and promises to cherish their selfie. When she thanks him for asking her out, Tsukasa says it's a nice city that they need to protect. Because of this, he tells her there's something he needs her to do that only she can. When Ringo returns to her workstation, she tells the bear to prepare for their biggest project yet. The next day, Shinobu informs Tsukasa that Conrad has left the Azure Brigade base to try and rejoin the Empire. Now that the traitors have rolled over, it's no longer safe for Shinobu. Meanwhile, the villagers from Gustava's town wind up sick, so the innkeeper asks the doctor to save her daughter. When the doctor says they're out of Kine's antibiotics, the innkeeper starts to beg Akatsuki to do something, but he knows there's nothing he can do. Suddenly, some of the village's doctors appear and insist that Akatsuki is a wicked god for not saving innocent people. They offer the innkeeper a secret medicine to cure her kid, but when she asks them for it, they laugh in her face and tell her to beg the Seven Lights' faith. Angered, Akatsuki silences the men and tells them they'll be saved by the healing power of his angel Keen. But when the men remind her she's out of antibiotics, she tells them she'll make the medicine out of coal. The men don't believe she can pull it off, so they tell her to come crawling once she fails. After they leave, Kine uses a needle to give the kid some relief, but she says it's only temporary. She tells the innkeeper to encourage her daughter not to give up. After, Aoi commends Akatsuki for taking charge and putting the men in their place, so Kine assures him they're about to make the magic bullet. Later, Kine prepares to make the medicines manually since Ringo is spending all her time on one project. However, she called in Lirul for help. Apparently, magic in this world can control chemical reactions, which means it can make medicines. The girls get started and Kine instructs Lirul to heat the coal and separate the coal tar into another pot. Next, Lirul heats the coal tar and separates the gas from it to form benzene. Kine quickly tells her not to breathe in too much of it if she doesn't want an acid trip to heaven. Next, they add some sulfuric acid and some ammonia, which smells like 100 golden showers. After all the work, Lirul finally turns the mixture into powder, and when Kine gets a taste of it, she says they've finally done it. They've officially made the magic bullet, sulfonamide. Afterward, Kine directs the staff to administer the drugs to all the patients, and moments later, the kid opens her eyes and calls out for her mom. When the innkeeper thanks Kine, Kine explains that she did most of the work by encouraging her daughter to fight off the pathogens. Suddenly, Kine notices one of the village doctors peeking and decides he needs to be taught a lesson. Later, the village doctors worry that they'll be out of business if Kine really cures everything, so they hatch a plan to force Kine to change her medicine to poison. Once the villagers start dying, the Seven Lights' faith will lose its power. At that moment, Kine comes out of hiding and hits the men with needles that paralyze them instantly. Once their leader comes to, Kine climbs on top of him and promises to persuade him as she pulls out a huge knife. The man begs her to reconsider and promises to change his ways. When Kine refuses, he calls her a demon, and one of her screws comes loose. She admits she's more of a demon than an angel because she despises God. She finds it unforgivable that he would create humans with so many flaws, so she plans to correct his mistakes by granting eternal bodies and reshaping minds. Some days later, the innkeeper and her daughter thank the doctors for all their help as they walk away, but Keenet assures him that he's now a very good boy. Meanwhile, Conrad meets with the Empire's General Nero, who pardons the Azure Brigade. Nero acknowledges that despite Gustava's loyalty, he was a little cray-cray, so his death was simply a survival of the fittest situation. However, he insists that the Seven Lights' faith is unacceptable. Nero knows the Azure Brigade can't possibly fight back, so he summons a masked ally who can help, and is even able to replicate Gustava's ultimate spell in an instant. Nero offers to send 10,000 men to fight with them too, so Conrad accepts and promises to get rid of the religious fools. Back in Dortmund, Ringo finally finishes her big project and asks Tsukasa if it was really a good idea to create a nuke. Tsukasa then explains that even though it is easy to create a nation, it takes power to maintain its sovereignty. Back at the Azure Brigade base, Jean sees Conrad's bodyguard and asks why he's not with Conrad. Suddenly, the knight signals hidden archers to attack, but Jean manages to evade. The knight reveals that he's been given orders to take her out and immediately starts attacking. Jeannie manages to cut through his armor, so the knight orders the archers to shoot her down. Jean gets cornered by the knights, who reveal that they already took care of her master. They intend to follow in Gustava's footsteps, but leave the peasants alive enough to squeeze out taxes. The bodyguard leaves her in the hands of the knights, who hope to have their way with her, so they rip off her armor, but before they can expose her, Shinobu shows up and takes them down in an instant. Shinobu explains that the Azure Brigade has rejoined the Empire and chosen to fight against the Seven Lights faith, but she came back for Jean because they're friends. Together, the girls face the bodyguard, so Shinobu takes his brains out, while Jean penetrates him with her sword. After, Jean grieves the loss of her master, who made her what she is today, so Shinobu offers to show her something. They head to an underground shelter where they find the gold statue Conrad lied about keeping. Jean breaks down as she remembers her former master's words to help the people and live nobly, which was why the Azure Brigade was founded. Shinobu tells her that her ideals still live on inside her, and asks her to join the Seven Lights faith. Jean accepts her offer, but when they hear someone coming, they quickly go into hiding. It turns out to be Conrad, the masked mage. When Conrad shows the mage the statue, the mage is offended that they broke his majesty's image. The mage then forgives Conrad for betraying him, since their policy is survival of the fittest. However, he can't forgive anyone who would willingly smash the image of the emperor. Conrad backs away in fear as the mage reveals himself to be Gustava and burns Conrad to a crisp. Gustava then reveals that Nero's secret arts were able to bring him back from the dead, as he notices the girls' presence and promises not to let them escape this time. The girls try to escape as Gustava's flames chase after them. Moments later, rogue flames start burning everyone inside as anyone in the area becomes collateral damage. The girls are able to escape on horses, so Shinobu reports to Tsukasa that Gustava is alive and more powerful than before. After receiving instructions from Tsukasa, Shinobu tells her they need to pick up the pace. Meanwhile, Gustava goes crazy with power as he manifests 4 powerful lances and plans to burn everything down for his majesty. However, as he spends several minutes monologuing about the painful ways he intends to maim his victims, a nuke heads toward him and decimates the entire castle. As Jean and Shinobu watch, Jean asks if Gustava was always this powerful, but Shinobu informs her that it was actually the power of the Seven Lights faith. She explains that if they felt like it, they could wipe out the entire imperial capital using their ultimate weapon, God's Thunderbolt. Back in Dortmund, the guys watch the glow in the distance, and when Rue asks Masato what it is, Masato says it's a sign that they've entered a new era. From now on, they'll be printing their own money too. Back at Ringo's base, Ringo tells Tsukasa that the hit was a success, but she looks sad. Tsukasa reminds her that the earlier attack on Dortmund was a threat that he plans to forbid once they're done forming their nation. However, he explains that they needed to prove they had equal or greater power, since diplomacy can only occur between equals. He assures Ringo that their power will eventually serve as a bridge to happiness. At this, Ringo realizes that Tsukasa made his request in a way that Ringo could push all the responsibility to him. She then grabs his hand and tells him that she doesn't resent him because he's always working hard for other people's happiness. Later, the people gather in the town square for an important announcement. Akatsuki appears and uses his magic to summon the rest of the prodigies, who the people think are angels. Akatsuki instructs Tsukasa to deliver an important message, so Tsukasa steps forward and informs the people of the Empire's attack on Azure Brigade. He explains that the Seven Lights faith defeated the enemy forces, so the Azure Brigade agreed to hand over power to them. Tsukasa tells the people that it is their desire for the people to rule themselves with equality for all. However, to do this, they need to change from being a nation, where everything belongs to the emperor and a few nobles, and instead become a republic. As Tsukasa continues to explain what they must do, the people agree that they're fed up with their greedy and useless leaders. Tsukasa promises that the Seven Lights Faith will spare no expense to help them, and then he asks if they're ready to fight for their freedom. The people rise up in unison to cheer in agreement, so Tsukasa officially renames them the Elm Republic. Suddenly, a pillar of flames rises from behind the citizens, so Tsukasa orders the prodigies and knights to evacuate the citizens. At the center of the fire stands Gustav, whose only goal is to snuff out all of His Majesty's enemies. Aoi and Shinobu step forward to face him, but as Gustav channels his rage, his body morphs into a demonic form while his eyes change into red crystals like his heart. A giant form of fire appears above him, and as Aoi and Shinobu rush forward to face him, Lirul tells them to target the gem on his chest. The fire spirit stops the girls from getting close to Gustav, but the girls are able to dodge all of its attacks. Shinobu creates an opening for Aoi to slice the gem with her sword, but her sword breaks apart, leaving the gem mostly intact. Gustav causes an explosion that knocks the girls back, then he rushes toward the rest of the group to attack. Tsukasa pulls out his handgun and starts firing. Though it slows the monster down, it still manages to leap in the air and head right for Tsukasa, till one of the bullets shatters the gem. The monster lands right before Tsukasa, with Gustav's eyes back to normal. He recognizes Tsukasa as the real leader and asks how he can possibly preach equality for all. He promises Tsukasa that even he will come to understand that this world exists for one man alone, the real prodigy chosen by the heavens to rule. Once Gustav is done with his speech, he turns into a pile of ash and disappears. Meanwhile, somewhere far away, three elves sense that their world is finally changing. At the same time, Neuro stands at the site where the nuke hit and acknowledges that the Seven Lights Faith will be an obstacle. That night, Tsukasa replays the memories of the Gustav demon, calling him a fake common man. When he wakes up, he admits that he's an imposter among the prodigies, because they're all capable of things only they can do. However, he's doing things anyone can do, which means he's not superhuman. Tsukasa worries that if he's not a true prodigy, would he really be able to beat the Emperor, who was apparently chosen by the heavens? Later in the Elm Village, the prodigies gather with Winona and the chief, where Ringo's bear presents the very first set of bottled mayonnaise. After, they all sit and eat, and Tsukasa makes a toast to the mayor's newly built home. Everyone enjoys the feast, but Rue enjoys it a little too much and drowns her entire plate in mayonnaise. She insists that she likes it almost as much as she likes money and continues to stack it on. Ringo and Lirul both call Tsukasa at the same time, but when he asks them what they need, Ringo tells Lirul to go first. Lirul offers him a taste of her honey, so Ringo quickly slides something to offer too. At this, Tsukasa decides that he has nothing to worry about since he's surrounded by such amazing friends. He then interrupts the lunch to discuss the policies for their new nation, and everyone is glad to help out. If you made it to the end of this video, prove it by commenting "I want Ringo to hit me with her nuke." And if you like anime recaps like this, then watch this video right here.